On my 28th birthday, my brother sat in my seat while my mom said, "Let him have his moment. You've had enough." I stayed silent. That night, I walked out forever. Weeks later, as they sang for him again, every phone in the room buzzed with a link that exposed everything they tried to hide. I always believed birthdays had a certain weight in my family, not the kind you see in movies, with balloons and speeches and people crying into their champagne. Ours were simpler, but sacred in their own way. Every year, no matter how chaotic things got, we'd gather around the long oak table in my parents' dining room. Same mismatched chairs, same cracked serving bowls, the same arguments about politics that ended with someone storming onto the porch. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours for 27 years. That table had been mine to return to. No matter what was happening outside deadlines, bills, broken relationships, knew that on my birthday, the seat at the head of the table would be waiting. It wasn't official. No one had carved my name into the wood or taped a sign to the back of the chair, but it was understood that seat was mine. This year, when I turned 28, I thought nothing would be different. I was wrong. I remember walking into the house that night, the smell of roast chicken and garlic bread already filling the air. For a moment, it felt normal. I saw cousins piling into the kitchen, my aunt laughing too loudly, my dad pretending to be busy with the grill outside, even though everyone knew my mom handled the cooking. I felt almost relieved, like maybe I had exaggerated the distance I'd been feeling from them. Maybe tonight would remind me why I kept coming back then. I stepped into the dining room. The chair, the one I always sat in, wasn't empty. Ryan, my younger brother, was already sitting there, reclined back like a king, holding a beer, flashing that effortless grin that made people forgive him for anything. My seat wasn't just taken, it was claimed. I froze in the doorway, waiting for someone to say something. Maybe it was a joke. Maybe they were keeping it warm for me. But no one moved. No one even looked my way. Ryan was telling some story, hands waving like he was on stage, and everyone was leaning in as if he'd been the guest of honor all along. I cleared my throat, just enough to make a sound. My mother finally glanced up from her phone, barely meeting my eyes. She didn't smile. She didn't explain. She just said 5 words that sliced through me sharper than I expected. Let him have his moment. I waited for more. An explanation, a reassurance, anything. Instead, she added, "You've had enough." I don't know why those words rattled me the way they did. Maybe because I knew deep down she wasn't talking about a chair. She was talking about me, about my place in this family, about everything. I'd done that. No one ever seemed to notice. The laughter around the table grew louder, but all I could hear was the echo of her voice. "You've had enough." That night, I realized something had cracked in a tradition I thought would never break. What started as a birthday dinner became something else entirely, a line drawn, invisible but permanent. And as I stood there, watching my brother bask in the spotlight that was supposed to be mine, I felt the ground shift beneath me. I didn't know it yet, but that was the beginning of everything that came after. On the surface, I guess I looked calm that night. I didn't shout. I didn't slam my hand on the table. I didn't demand my seat back. But inside, I felt the weight of the sacrifice I had ever made pressing against my chest like a ledger being tallied in real time. It wasn't just about a chair. It was about everything that had come before it. When my dad lost his job years ago, I was the one who picked up the mortgage payment without hesitation. I was 22, barely starting my own career, but I wired the money every month so they wouldn't lose the house. I told myself it was temporary. It lasted nearly a year. When the electricity bill came late, it was my debit card they used. When Ryan dropped out of college after 2 semesters, I co-signed his student loan refinance because he swore he had a business plan that just needed time to take off. That business never existed. I was the quiet one, the dependable one, the one they didn't brag about at reunions, but relied on when things went sideways. Ryan was different. He was reckless, charming, irresponsible, and somehow adored for it. He quit jobs on a whim, bounced from one half-baked idea to the next, and still managed to be called the dreamer. And me, I was the safety net, the invisible scaffolding that kept everyone standing, even when no one acknowledged I was there. I told myself I didn't mind. I told myself that family was supposed to help family. But as I stood in that dining room, watching Ryan in my seat, laughing like he'd earned the spotlight, I realized my quiet patience had become something else. Resentment, the kind that doesn't flare up in a single moment, but builds over years, layering itself like sediment. I had been burying it under excuses. He's younger, he'll figure it out. Or Mom and Dad just want him to feel supported. But deep down, I knew the truth. Ryan wasn't floating because of his brilliance. He was floating because I was holding him up, and now on my birthday they had the nerve to tell me I'd had enough. I tried to swallow it, but the words lodged in my throat. I could almost hear a voice in the back of my mind asking the question I'd been too afraid to confront. If I stopped carrying them, would everything finally collapse? That thought sat with me through dinner, through Ryan's smug jokes, through the hollow laughter of relatives, pretending not to notice the tension. By the time the cake came out, I knew the answer, and I was the one who had been quietly written. Out of the script, Ryan had the room in the palm of his hand. He leaned back in my chair, grinning, spinning another story about a startup he was leading. He used words like creative director and brand strategist, the kind of titles that sounded impressive until you realized he couldn't explain a single thing he actually did. His voice carried over the clinking of glasses, smooth and confident, like he believed every word of it. I watched the faces around the table. Some smiled, some nodded, some laughed at the right beats, but I could see the doubt in their eyes. They didn't believe him either. Not really, but nobody said anything. No one ever did. Then came the part that burned the deepest. Ryan turned the conversation toward me. Some people think money buys happiness, he said casually, swirling his drink, but happiness is something you either have or you don't. A ripple of laughter rolled through the table. It wasn't loud, not cruel, but it was enough. Enough to make my stomach twist. Enough to make me wonder if they were laughing at the absurdity of his words, or at me. My girlfriend, Sarah, sitting beside me, stiffened. She forced a polite smile, but I could feel the tension in her hand as it brushed against mine under the table. She tried to steer things back, complimenting Ryan on his jacket, asking about his venture. He smirked and said, "It's all about connections. When you're the favorite, doors just open." He looked directly at me when he said it. The table erupted in chuckles again. My mother laughed the loudest. By the time dessert rolled around, my patience was thin, stretched to the breaking point. I had ordered the cake myself, chocolate, layered thick, just the way I liked it. For one small moment, I thought maybe the night could still be salvaged. The lights dimmed, the cake was carried in, candles flickering. My chest tightened with the faintest flicker of hope. Then my mother's voice cut through the glow. "Ryan, why don't you blow them out this time? You always bring the energy." The room cheered. "My cake, my candles." My night handed to him, as though I didn't exist. Ryan clapped his hands like a child, leaned forward, and blew out every flame while everyone applauded. I didn't move, I didn't smile, I didn't even breathe. In that moment, something inside me went still. Not anger, not sadness, just stillness, sharp and cold. A kind of silence you feel before a storm. I pushed my chair back. The scrape of wood against the floor cut through the applause like a warning shot. No one looked up. No one stopped me. I walked upstairs to my old room, closed the door, and knew with absolute certainty I wouldn't open it again as their son in the same way. A few minutes later, Sarah followed. She didn't ask questions. She just picked up her bag, took my hand, and we walked out into the night. The air outside felt clearer than the laughter we left behind. We didn't speak as we drove away, headlights carving through the dark streets. There was nothing to say, but as the silence settled in the car, I knew something had shifted. It wasn't just disappointment anymore. It was resolve. Quiet, dangerous. Resolve. When Sarah and I left that night, I half expected my phone to light up with calls before we even made it to the end of the street. That's what families do, right? Someone storms out, someone else follows, and eventually the whole thing dissolves into apologies, excuses, or at least a late-night argument. But there was nothing. 2 days passed. Not a call from my mother, not a text from my father, not even a sarcastic message from Ryan. The silence was almost louder than the laughter I had walked away from. It was as if my absence had been folded into the fabric of the family, without leaving a crease. The people I least expected were the ones who broke the quiet. My cousin Julie called and said she'd never seen anything so humiliating. She told me she almost left with me but didn't want to make a scene. Then Uncle Mark, the man who usually sat on the porch pretending to hate everyone, left me a voicemail. His voice was low, steady, angrier than I'd ever heard. "You did the right thing," he said. "That wasn't a celebration. That was a circus." Even Jared, a cousin who barely talks to anyone, called to say that when Ryan made his little jab about me buying happiness, he thought about walking out himself. Their words didn't erase what happened, but they reminded me I wasn't imagining it. I wasn't crazy for feeling the way I did. Others had seen it too. They just didn't have the courage to leave. Meanwhile, Ryan was busy curating his version of the night online. Photos of him laughing, raising his glass, captions like, "Energy attracts energy," and "Success threatens the insecure." Each one a performance, a carefully staged delusion. I scrolled through them with a kind of detached disbelief. He wasn't embarrassed. He wasn't ashamed. In his mind, he had one. My silence, he thought, was weakness. But he didn't realize silence can be sharper than any accusation. By the third day, my mother finally texted. Just 5 words. "Hope you're okay. Love you." Any acknowledgement of what had happened. No apology. Just a casual check-in. Like she hadn't watched my birthday be handed to someone else. I stared at the message until the screen dimmed. Then I set the phone down and never replied. For the first time, I began to wonder if walking away hadn't been an ending at all. Maybe it was just the opening act of something much bigger, because what none of them knew, not my parents, not Ryan, not anyone, was that for years I had been the one paying Ryan's rent, nearly $9,000 in total. His landlord didn't even have his number. Every month, the message came to me. And August was just around the corner. The silence wasn't an ending. It was an opportunity. And soon, they would understand exactly what that meant. The first day of every month used to come with a knot in my stomach, not because of my own bills I could handle those, but because of the text that always arrived like clockwork. It was from Ryan's landlord, not Ryan, never Ryan. "Rent due tomorrow, sending to you." For 2 years, that man never once contacted my brother. He didn't even have Ryan's number saved. Every conversation, every payment, every desperate excuse, it all came through me, $9,000. That was the total by the time July slipped into August. $9,000 poured into a black hole that Ryan called his fresh start. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself I was buying him time. I told myself it was what family does. But that night after my birthday, the night I watched him blow out my candles while everyone applauded, I stopped telling myself anything. When the landlord's text came through that morning, I stared at it longer than usual. My thumb hovered over the screen. All I had to do was send another transfer, the same way I always did, and the machine would keep running. Ryan would keep floating, and I'd keep sinking. Instead, I typed 2 words I had never written before. "Not this time." The reply was almost instant. "Are you sure? He'll be behind?" I breathed in, slow and steady, and wrote back, "He's on his own." It was like pressing a detonator. An hour later, my phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't the landlord. It was Ryan. 1 line. No greeting, no punctuation. "What did you do?" I didn't answer. 10 minutes later, another message. Then a call, then 3 more. Soon my phone screen was a wall of missed calls. Ryan's name flashing over and over, followed by Mom, then Dad, then back to Ryan. The cycle of panic had begun. I silenced the phone, slid it face down on the table, and turned to Sarah. She was already pulling on her shoes, eyes searching mine. "Burgers?" she asked softly. I nodded, and just like that, we left. No phone, no guilt, no second guessing. Just greasy burgers, cheap fries. And the strange kind of peace that comes from finally setting something heavy down. That night, for the first time in years, I slept without waking up at 3 a.m. to check my bank balance, but peace doesn't last long in a family built on illusions. By the end of the week, the fallout began. It didn't take long. 3 days after I cut the cord, the texts started trickling in, not from Ryan, not even from my parents, but from relatives who had heard whispers before I did. "Did you really stop paying?" one cousin asked. Another simply wrote, "Your brother's in trouble." By midweek, I got confirmation. Ryan had been given 72 hours to vacate his apartment, the same apartment he'd paraded as proof of his independence, the one he told everyone was covered by his latest contract. In reality, The lease had always been tethered to me. Without my payments, the whole illusion collapsed in less than a week. When word spread, the reactions split the family in two. Some pitied him. My mother called his eviction a setback. My father excused it as just a rough patch. They spun it like it was the weather, temporary, unavoidable, no one's fault. But others weren't so quick to forgive. Aunt Helen reminded me of the $1,000 she had lent Ryan last year, money he promised to pay back after his business took off. He never did. Uncle Mark told me flat out that he'd refused to give Ryan a dime after being burned twice before. Even my cousin Julie admitted she had started avoiding his calls because every conversation ended with some new scheme or request. It was like the dam had finally broken. Everyone had their story, their moment when Ryan leaned on them, lied to them, or left them feeling used. For years, I had thought I was the only one carrying the weight. Now I realized the entire family had been drafted into his fantasy, and I had just been the one funding the main act. The lies began to unravel faster than anyone expected. Someone asked him at a family barbecue what happened to the job offer in Chicago he had bragged about months earlier. He laughed it off, said the company ghosted him. Later, Aunt Helen called me privately and said she'd heard he threw himself a going-away dinner for that same job, complete with gifts, speeches, and toasts. He never even applied. The pieces started falling into place for everyone else, but for me, they'd been clear all along. I had just chosen not to connect them. By the time Ryan moved his boxers back into my parents' house, the golden glow that had once followed him into every room had dimmed. The captions on his Instagram grew shorter, less confident. The likes and comments dwindled. It was the realization that all I had done was tip the first domino. The rest of the collapse was still coming, and when it did, it wouldn't stop with Ryan, because every mask he wore had been held in place by someone else's hands. My parents, my relatives, even me. And now that the mask was slipping, everyone was about to see how deep the cracks really ran. Watching Ryan stumble back into my parents' house should have been enough. His lies were cracking, his audience shrinking, and for the first time in years, he was standing in the shadow of his own failure instead of basking in a spotlight I had been forced to hold up for him. But part of me knew it wouldn't last. My parents were masters at spinning shame into sympathy. Give them enough time, and they'd find a way to frame Ryan's collapse as my cruelty. That narrative was dangerous because silence can make guilt sound true. So I decided to end the silence. Late one night, after Sarah had gone to bed, I opened my laptop. For hours, I gathered everything: bank statements, screenshots of transfers, old texts, even a recording I hadn't meant to capture. It was a phone call from last year, Ryan on speaker, boasting to a friend about a fake job offer in Chicago. His voice was smug, rehearsed, confident. At the time, I'd rolled my eyes and let it pass. At the top, receipts. Don't lie. Line by line, I laid it out. Every rent payment, every excuse, every false promise to pay me back. Beneath that, screenshots of Ryan's messages. I'll pay you next month. Don't tell mom and dad this is temporary. And finally, the audio clip. 3 minutes of Ryan bragging about a life he never lived. When I finished, I sat back and stared at the screen. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't even anger anymore. It was the truth, stripped bare of excuses. I scheduled the link to send automatically. The timing wasn't random. It was set for the night of Ryan's birthday. When the day came, I didn't attend. Sarah and I drove 2 hours out of town, rented a cabin by the lake, turned our phones face down. For once, I wanted to hear nothing but the sound of water against the dock. But silence never lasts. Around 9 that evening, after another, until the screen looked like it might explode, I finally picked it up. 90 missed calls, dozens of texts. One message stood out. What did you do? Later, through the grapevine, I learned what happened. The family was gathered. Cake on the table, candles lit. Just as they were about to sing, every phone in the room buzzed at once. At first, they thought it was an Amber Alert, but when they saw the link, curiosity overrode hesitation. One by one, they clicked. The room shifted instantly. At first, my mother told everyone to put their phones away. My father muttered something about overreacting, but the damage was already done. Aunt Helen stormed out before the cake was cut. Uncle Mark confronted Ryan in front of everyone. "Is any of this real?" Ryan had no answer. My cousin Julie later told me the air felt like it had been sucked out of the house. The golden child had been unmasked, and the crown they had forced on his head dissolved in real time. I didn't need to imagine Ryan's face. I knew it. The smirk gone, the confidence crumbling, the room no longer laughing with him, but staring, judging, connecting dots they should have seen years ago. That night, while the party disintegrated, I sat on the porch of the cabin, listening to the stillness of the lake. For the first time, the truth was no longer mine to carry alone. But what I didn't know then was that the blast radius of that website wouldn't stop with Ryan. The spotlight was about to swing toward my parents and the secrets they had been hiding in plain sight. I thought the website would be the end of it. I thought once Ryan's lies were peeled back and the family saw the truth for themselves, I could finally step out of the shadows and breathe. But exposing Ryan was only the first crack. The real fracture came from somewhere I hadn't expected. My parents. The morning after Ryan's party imploded, I checked the website analytics out of curiosity. I could see who clicked, how long they stayed, even who replayed the audio clip. That's when I noticed something strange. A login pinged from an old account, my father's email address, the same one linked to a credit card portal I hadn't touched in months. For a moment, I didn't understand. Then it clicked, I opened the portal, and my stomach dropped. Nearly $5,000 in charges. Groceries, utility bills, food delivery, even rent payments. My old card, the one I'd given them years ago during my dad's layoff, was still being used quietly, secretly. For months, I had cut Ryan off. But my parents had been draining me in silence the entire time. It wasn't just betrayal. It was theft wrapped in the disguise of trust. I remembered the year I gave them access. Just for emergencies, I had said. They nodded, promised they'd never abuse it. I forgot about it. They didn't. They had turned my goodwill into their safety net, too. That afternoon, I sat at my desk and called the bank. My voice was steady, detached, almost rehearsed. "Never authorized these charges," I said. The representative walked me through freezing the card, disputing the transactions, setting up fraud alerts. By the time I hung up, the account was dead. My dad called first, his voice clipped. "Son, the internet bill failed today. Did something happen with the card?" I let the phone ring out. He called again an hour later. Then my mom, then Ryan. I ignored every single one. The next day, a cousin messaged me. "Your parents are panicking. Their house of cards is collapsing." The irony wasn't lost on me. They had built a castle of lies around Ryan, and now the foundation was giving way beneath their own feet. For years, I had convinced myself that keeping them afloat was the price of being the strong one. But strength isn't measured by how much you can carry for others. Sometimes it's measured by how firmly you can let go. The truth was out, but the real confrontation was still coming, the one where I would have to decide whether silence would be my shield. My phone lit up like a beacon in the dark. Mom, Dad. Ryan, then back to Mom again. Sometimes they left voicemails, sometimes they didn't. When I listened, it was always the same rehearsed panic. Double quotes, "Son, the card's not working, can you call? US back. Michael, this isn't the way to handle things. Your family." And Ryan, his voice raw with anger. "You're ruining everything. You don't know what you've done." They didn't ask how I was. They didn't apologize. They weren't even subtle. They just wanted the machine turned back on. The faucet opened, the lifeline restored. On the fourth night, sometime past midnight, I sat at the edge of my bed. The silence inside me had hardened into something sharp. I knew it was time. I opened the family group chat, maybe something polite, something careful. But then I remembered my birthday, the chair, the candles, the applause. Now watch what happens when I blow out the lights. I'm not your foundation. I'm not your fallback. This was never love, it was convenience. I'm done pretending. Don't call. I've already forgiven you. But I don't owe you anything. Else I hit send. The message appeared in blue against the screen, final and immovable. And then nothing, no replies. B. For the first time in my life, my family had nothing left to say. That silence was heavier than any word they could have thrown at me. But it wasn't empty. Then peeling away, layer by layer, I wasn't angry anymore. And in the days that followed, the fallout reached farther than even I imagined. At first, the silence felt absolute, like my message had shattered the air and left nothing but dust behind. But silence never lasts long in a family built on performance. The cracks began showing within days. I heard from my cousin Julie first. She sent a short text. "Your brother deleted everything." I didn't understand until she explained Ryan had wiped his social media clean. Instagram, gone. The golden child had vanished into digital nothingness. My mother tried to spin it, of course. She called Aunt Helen, saying Ryan was taking a break for his mental health, that the online harassment had become too much. But the only thing that had gone viral wasn't harassment, it was the truth. Forwarded from cousin to cousin, aunt to uncle, until nearly every relative had seen it. They weren't angry at me, they were furious at him. Cousin Zoe confronted Ryan directly. "Why did you let Michael pay your rent all this time?" His answer was as casual as it was cruel. He didn't mind. Those 3 words hit harder than any lie he'd ever told. Because I did mind. I minded every month when my paycheck disappeared before I could enjoy it. I minded when my parents bragged about Ryan's fake projects while ignoring the career I actually built. I minded when I watched Sarah force a smile. At the dinner table, while my mother told me to sit down and let Ryan have his moment, but Ryan believed my silence meant consent. Uncle Mark admitted Ryan once borrowed his truck for business delivery, only to use it for a weekend trip with friends, and never gave it back. Each story piled onto the last, the illusion of Ryan as the star collapsing into rubble. My parents tried to contain it, but they were unraveling too. Then came the utilities. Then the mortgage payment. Years of quiet dependence on me had left them unprepared for reality. Without me, as the safety net, the ground gave way beneath them. Through it all, my father stayed silent until one night he finally broke. A text arrived on my phone, his first direct message since the fallout. "You've made your point, but this is still your family." That was it. No apology, no acknowledgement. Just a reminder that blood was supposed to bind me tighter than betrayal. I stared at the words for a long time. Sarah asked me if I was okay, and I realized I didn't feel anger anymore. What I felt was distance, as though that text had been sent from a stranger, not the man who raised me. The fallout had done more than expose. They loved me for what I provided, and without me holding the weight, dissolve quietly. They claw, they bargain, they show up when you least expect it. And that moment came sooner than I thought, when the dust of the fallout finally settled. I expected to feel relief. What I didn't expect was the emptiness that followed. For the first time in my life, my phone was quiet, not the buzzing panic of overdue bills, not the guilt-laced voicemails from my parents, not Ryan demanding another bailout. Just silence. Yet, silence has 2 faces. One is suffocating. She told me my shoulders didn't look so tense anymore, that I wasn't clenching my jaw in my sleep. I could imagine a life that wasn't tethered to someone else's survival. That's when her parents stepped in. Her dad said between bites of roast chicken, "It's small, nothing fancy." We were going to rent it out, but the idea of moving, of starting fresh, felt like betrayal, as if cutting the last cord to my family would mean abandoning the version of me that had carried them all these years. A modest, white house with a wide porch and a backyard that stretched farther than I expected. No shadows clung to the walls, no ghosts whispered in the corners. Just space. Porch. Mornings, drinking coffee without dread. Evenings filled with conversation instead of exhaustion. We said yes, quietly, no announcement, no family email thread, no ceremony of goodbyes. Just the decision to leave. Packing was surreal, felt almost like a dream. Sarah thrived, I slept better. I let the silence grow, and in that silence, I found peace. But peace never lasts forever. They resurface when you least expect it, clawing their way back into your life with the weight of history. And one afternoon, I looked up from my desk at work and saw her, my mother, sitting in the lobby with a coffee cup in her hands, as if we were just meeting for lunch. I froze when I saw her, a paper cup of coffee cradled in her hands like she'd been waiting for me all morning. She didn't look angry. She didn't look broken. She just looked tired. I thought about turning around, walking back out into the street, pretending I hadn't seen her. But something in her eyes stopped me. It wasn't the commanding stare of the woman who once dictated every holiday and silenced every disagreement. It was smaller, quieter, like she knew this was her last chance. I walked over, but I didn't sit. Simple, almost rehearsed. I didn't answer. She filled the silence with small talk about the weather. I could tell she wanted me to nod, to soften, to give her an opening. I didn't. Finally, she pulled an envelope from her purse and slid it across the table between us. Inside was a check. $6,000. The exact amount I had paid for Ryan's rent over the years. "It's from me and your father," she said. "We took out a loan. We wanted to make it right." I stared at the check for a long time, the numbers blurring. Then I pushed it back. "You don't want it?" she asked, almost surprised. "No," I said, "because this was never about money." Her brow furrowed. She leaned back, waiting for me to go on. "It was about the night you let him take my seat, blow out my candles, and you clapped while it happened. It was about how you let him steal moments, not just money, and told me to be quiet because I'd had enough. It was about how you used me as a lifeline and treated me like a backup plan. That's what the money can't cover." Her lips trembled just slightly, but she didn't argue. She didn't deny it. She just sat there, letting the truth hang between us like smoke. "I forgive you," I said finally. "I forgive you because I don't want to carry it anymore. But forgiveness doesn't mean return. It doesn't mean I'm coming back. I'm done." She didn't cry, she didn't beg. And then she stood, left the coffee on the table, and walked out of the lobby without looking back. I watched her go, a strange mix of sorrow and relief curling in my chest. It wasn't the reunion she wanted. It wasn't the apology I deserved. It was just the end. But endings have a way of lingering, and in the weeks that followed, the weight of that encounter would give way to something unexpected-freedom.life. After my mother walked out of that lobby, felt strangely quiet, but not the kind of silence I'd grown up with. This wasn't the heavy pause of people waiting for me to fix their mistakes. This was clean, open mind. In the weeks that followed, I began to notice things I'd forgotten how to appreciate. The way mornings felt without a dozen notifications buzzing through my phone, the way Sarah's laugh sounded when it wasn't strained by tension at my family's table, the way I could come home and cook dinner without glancing at my bank account first, wondering how much had been drained behind my back. For years, but true strength, I learned, was finally setting them down. News of my family reached me through whispers, fragments carried by cousins who still checked in. Ryan had taken a part-time job at a local gym, working the front desk. My parents had fallen behind on bills, then taken out a small loan with interest rates that would swallow them whole. The golden child had lost his shine, and the empire they built around him had turned to dust. I didn't call, I didn't visit, I didn't send money. Not out of hatred, not out of revenge, but because I had finally understood, sometimes the only way to heal is to let people become strangers again in our new house. The air was lighter. Sarah unpacked the last box one evening, stood in the middle of the living room, and said, "This is what starting over looks like." I believed her. I was free. Freedom doesn't always come with fireworks. Sometimes it comes quietly, in the steady rhythm of a life no one else controls. And when I look back now, I don't feel anger. I don't feel regret. I just see the night it all changed. The night they let my brother blow out my candles. Freedom didn't come from their apologies, came from my decision to stop carrying what was never mine to hold. If this story struck a chord with you, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more powerful family drama stories. Your support helps us bring more of these real emotional journeys to life.